yourself, what would I need to do to get that up around 30 or so? That's it. Okay, let's stop right there. Now we'll just go over, basically that's exactly what you would do, but we're going to go through a number of things that involve the hands to start how to pull one of the things, and then the next just the basic coordination. And the reason we're starting on this instead of going out on the water is because once I hand you an oar, 12-foot oar, you can easily imagine that your entire attention is going to be on the chaos that's taking place on the end of the oar. And if we can get this part down, your body down, so that it's completely second nature, it would be quite convenient for you to think about the oar. On the other hand, if you're thinking of the oar, while this is still pretty unusual for you, it's a dismal situation. So let's grab onto this thing here. We're just going to do this a little bit at a time. Keep your knees right down, flat. Keep your knees right down, flat all the way. Okay. And then here is roughly where the end of the stroke is right here. The first thing I want to have you do is to see if you can get used to bringing this thing in and having it come back without it feeling that you're shrugging. Relax up here. That was really, really tight. See if you can get the feeling of what it's like to draw that handle into you. First, the arms are straight, and you draw in. Without any of what I'm feeling, without any tightness at all. So the lat muscles down here, and there's just no temptation at all to shrug up or to pull yourself forward, but just a sort of a gentle squeeze towards you. Okay?
Am I being too far back here?
No, it's fine. And as you do that, a little daylight between the thumb and the fingers, which will show me that you understand that squeezing enough does nothing more than send the sap out the end of the handle. It doesn't draw the handle towards you, right? Squeezing it is doing nothing, so you just want to get the fingers loosely around the handle and have it draw towards you and have a little daylight between the thumbs and the handle all the time. That's good. And really, really relax, almost feeling that the shoulders go down a little bit as you draw, so that these big muscles under your shoulders are pulling your shoulders down onto your skeleton rather than you pushing them up off the skeleton. That's good. And that's the first exercise that you want to do. Around, and constantly. That's steady, like that. Good. Now, next thing we're going to do is the same exact thing, but this time the knees stay down. And instead of putting the body back, what we have to know is now you come forward until and how far forward you come? Until your hamstrings get a little tight. And at that point, those muscle fibers have stretched to the natural time you'd like them to contract, let them contract, and back you go again to where you move forward and draw in. But first the arms go away, and when those muscle fibers want to stretch, now you stretch your hamstrings. Now, first the hamstrings contract, and then the arms contract. So extend in the arms, and extend in the hamstrings, and contract in the hamstrings, and finally contract in the arms. Very nice. Body stays back, arms away first, and body over. That's right. Just relax the shoulders as you possibly can. Let the shoulders stay down. And as soon as you're able to, what we did before, it's better to stop it all. Just coming in, and we do it from right away. Exactly. If you want to look at that little slot on the machine there, as you come forward, keep it just on the bottom of that slot, and as you come back, just on the top of the slot. You make that change right out here. It comes forward, it lifts a little bit, it comes right back. Good. All right? Now the next thing we do is after the hamstrings have extended to the point at which you're thinking either come back or I'm going to break the hamstring. Instead of that, we'll just let this draw you forward a little bit, about halfway up the track. Just about that much, and then let's reverse right back and do what we can do. Try it. That's right. And remember to let the hamstrings tighten before you do this. Don't let the knees pop up until you feel dynamic. Okay, and don't let the seat. Let me show you what I mean by this. Once the body gets over, all right, now there's a distance between here and here. And as you come forward, you want to preserve that distance. You don't want to let your seat start to seat up like that while you're leaning on the way. Okay? That's it. Okay, and back you go. Good. That's fine. And if you can figure it out, when you come back, so that your knees just get flat about the time that you've got that handle right into your body. And you'll have that hip thrust. So the knees don't just flop down by themselves, but you kind of squeeze them down as you lean back. As you lean back. So you're going to lean and the leg will squeeze down. Good. Very nice. That's the idea. And so as you do that, you might be able to feel it as you're pushing here, as you're pushing against the foot structure, you're also leaning. And so two muscle groups are being nicely used to turn the wheel out there. Okay? When you feel comfortable with that, let's lean forward a little bit further. That's right. And once again, lean as the legs go down. Good. Just like the thumb behind you. Just loosely, not squeezing. Right. Now you can just play with that by coming forward a little further, and we'll finish this segment with just going out and taking some full strokes. You feel comfortable about doing that. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. The next 2 or 3 strokes, I want to see you eventually get up to here, just about touching that. Very nice. Okay? Keep going. Don't stop. And now we're going to go with that. Don't stop out there at all. Okay? Out we go. Like that. Relax the shoulders. Now see how smooth that can be. There you go. No need to lift up on it either. That's a tiny change of plane, straight arms. A little bit lower, a little bit higher. That's a big difference. You're not pulling it up anymore. You're just guiding it. Very nice. Right around, like that. And you'll lean back and back a little bit further. The shoulders nice and low. Number one thing that someone's really starting out has to contend with is that tendency to shrug and punch a little bit in the shoulders. And where would we guide this thing in if we wanted to come in straight line? Right about the bottom of the press there. Right about there. That's it. Very nice. Okay, now if you just practice that a little bit for a while, until that's really comfortable, then you'll know how to do rowing in a symmetrical sense. In other words, on this machine, you'll notice that everything is symmetrical. Everything goes forward, and every part of your body, the right side of your body does exactly what the left side does. And if you were rowing in a single scull, you could learn how right on this machine here. Unfortunately, you're going to be rowing in 8, which means that virtually everything you do is going to be very asymmetrical. And the next machine we go to after we get this kind of symmetrical rowing down will take us to that next step of how do you row asymmetrically. We've got 2 very different things happening on each side of your body. To talk about here, watch out now with the knees coming up too soon, right? The knees stay down, the arms are out straight, right? And the thing I want to talk about on the hands here is if those wrist bones stay pinched in, like that, that drives the shoulders up a lot. And it also doesn't prepare you well for the asymmetrical rowing that we're talking about. So what you need to do is to allow those hands to turn out a little bit, allow the wrists to rotate out as you come forward each time. Remember, keep the knees right down there as you come forward. Watch. Knees down, arms extend, and right out. I think that's the end of that. Lord knows you do. Okay? Nice, low knees. Good. Out with the wrists. Really doesn't turn. Turn right outside. And the key to that is the index finger. That index finger come on top of the handle like this. Take a look here. The index finger rotates up on top like that, which means that both of the forearms, instead of being pinched in against your sides, have been allowed to go up. The key to this is the fingertip of the index finger. If that's locked under the handle, nothing can turn. The elbows can't go up, the forearms can't go up, and the wrist bones can't go up. Nothing can go up if that fingertip is under the handle. That's the lock to hold the hand in place. Okay, let's go over and take a look at the next thing then. Okay, now the first thing we need to take a look at on this machine is obviously the oar is out to one side. There are going to be some geometry things that we have to take a look at. The first is right here. Clearly, you have a whole different situation. It's not square out here. And many of the people who start out rowing ask me, how in the world can this be done? And they insist that it can't. They say that if you're sitting here with your, shoulders reasonably square, and both arms out straight, that this is the best that can be done. Put this arm nice and straight. And they'll look at it and say that that's about it. There's no way you can touch that thing. And how are you going to touch it now? What makes that happen? It makes this arm here stay straight, this arm here stay straight. What allows that to happen is that this shoulder here stays back on your skeleton very much. And as you can see, this shoulder here is freely drawn forward. And because the shoulders are back like this, almost the same angle as the oar is, you end up with a nice parallelogram. This is able to stay straight. When that isn't straight, because people don't think that that's possible geometrically, then you end up with people with a praying mantis, left arm. If you bring this straight and square it, and that's straight, and that's really bent, you see how many people row that way, and they say that that's the only way they can row. So that you could get a good start on that quite naturally. You turn a little bit your spine, right in your hips. I can see that you turn, and you approach this the proper way without bending it, so that you're off to a good start on this. All right, the other big change that takes place is the two hands clearly are not going to be like that, exactly. You're not going to be out, squeeze that a little bit. You see how you go out and around the corner that way? Can't do that. So you just loosen up a little bit and allow this wrist bone to come in. And likewise with this, if you squeezed with that, you would send your whole arm in there, and you can't do that. So quite naturally, just touching that with no resistance, you've come to some good conclusions about what you have to do. Whether you're going to be able to do that when there is some resistance is another matter, but it's nice to see that right from the start that you've got that right. Now here's the other thing that's different. Before, you had the knees coming right straight up and down like that, and they went up and down, and everything was fine. Here, we're going to have the two knees in different places. The knee nearest the oar goes straight up and down, in this case it's your left knee. This other knee is going to end up just outside your right shoulder. So in this case it goes oar, and then it goes elbow, knee, arm, knee. So it goes oar, then arm, knee, Pardon me while I hit you in the face here. Okay, so now let's take a look at how that happens. The knee goes down, you come back to the end of the stroke. Let's just take a look at how we can. Okay, that's just fine. And things are going so well just naturally, just playing with the machine right now, that I'm just going to let you just row that way a little bit. As you can see, that you've got the knees coming up properly, the inside knee straight up and down. Out here, moving right around the turn, allowing that right hand to turn out now. Just as we talked about on the other machine, that right hand turns out. Fortunately, the left hand doesn't have to now when you have an oar out to one side like that. And let's see if we can get a little more laid back to this hand and the shoulders down. We've got a fair amount of resistance there with 4 pounds. That's quite a bit of resistance just to begin with. So let me just adjust that now. We'll take about 5 more strokes. See if you can get a little bit more laid back there. Open up a little further, even a bit further than that. So you really get back. I want to have you overdo the layback a little bit. Right back and then draw, and that's it. And remember that while the body's back, the arms go away first, then the body over, and last of all the arms. So now, that's right, I want you to get the feeling of just stretching out the both things, really being limber and loose about this now. Lots and lots of extension. Very, very nice. Let's just take about 5 more strokes, just like that. Nice lay back, just nice and smooth. Keep the left hand just gently around the handle. Don't let the fingers come flying off. Okay, that's very nice. All right, now let's stop. And the last thing we'll move on to a machine that has a counter on it, and we'll talk about what it's like to do that, except hard and some power. Okay, now we've got some real resistance on this machine, and we've also got a counter here. And I want to give you a chance to relate what you've learned to actually seeing how much force you're exerting on something. A chance to row harder, just have some feel for a payoff for the technical things you've learned. I'm going to turn the counter on right now. You can see that as you pull back, the little needle starts to float up a little bit. And what you want to do is go along here until you get it up to about 40. And then once you've got it up to 40, then you start a 10-stroke piece where you try to get it up to 50. And just try that for now. And we'll talk about it. There you go. First get it up to 40, and each time you do that, like just turning the corner a little bit more quickly, getting good pressure here, squeezing the legs right down flat. Once you get it up to 40, you'll take 10 very hard strokes. Okay, here we are at 40. Let's set the 10 hard ones on this one. Okay, 10 just as hard as you can. In that direction. As hard as you can get your head to down. Now the way you'll get this up to 50 is by pushing here just as hard as you can and as quickly as you can. It's a sudden explosion right here. If you wanted to squeeze that thing just about 5 more strokes. Here we go. 48, there was 50 on that one. Push hard, break the pressure right off on the last 2 strokes. 1, and stop. Okay, catch your breath. Let's just let it sit here for a little bit. Okay, just wait just a second. We can come to the finish here, that's a good idea. The last thing I want to talk about before we go into tanks is continuity. And if there's one thing this machine should show you when you're going hard, it's the idea that you certainly don't want to pause out here at all, either with the handle or with the seat. Now we talked about the distance between your seat and the handle. That's an awfully important distance. It should stay the same as you come forward. And just the same way that you don't want to come to a standstill here and then give it some sort of a shock. Likewise, you certainly don't want to have your seat coming forward, stopping at the end of the track, and then after a pause going back. You ought to be able to feel that on this with this amount of weight, which is pretty good weight, because if you sit out here, you'll be very well aware that you've allowed that wheel to decelerate, and then when you try and pick it up again, it's no fun at all. Basically, you want to get the feeling here on this machine that you have a thing that's moving, and you want to just keep it moving. You just want to pick it up and move it. And that's precisely the same thing that's going on in the boat. You stop and think about it. And we'll talk about that in the tank. The last thing we do today will be moving water in the tank, which will be pretty heavy stuff for a quick session like this. But you'll find that it's exactly the same thing. You have something that's moving, and you want to just pick it up and keep it moving. And so this machine here is in many ways identical to rolling on the water. And once you have this right, you'll have that right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take one piece, once again, try and bring it up to 40 and set up for a piece, and then we'll try once again to go as hard as you can and see if we'll get it up. The last time was 50. This time I'm sure we'll be up well over 50. And do that, and the reason it'll be over 50 is because you now know how to row hard, but now we're going to row hard without the least hint of having that thing decelerated. You'll be so happy to see that the heavy feeling is gone. It's light. You go up there and you drive back, and something which is already moving fast, you're just going to keep it moving fast. It'll be a whole different feeling for you. Okay, so let's go along and just slowly take your time, easing it up. That's right. Taking probably 5 or 6 strokes just to get that thing up towards 40. No break at all. And as soon as you begin to get it moving, keep it moving, and each time you move them up a little bit further. That's good. Okay, getting up near 40 now. Okay, let's take 10 strokes now on this one. And with each single stroke, a little bit quicker in the legs. Already at 50, so you're only on the 3rd stroke. 5 now. Here we go, up to 55. 1, and that seems away from me really quickly. 3, another one to 60. And stop. Very, very nice. You see now, listen to it. That's a whole different sound from what we were dealing with before. So the labored tick, 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 tick with death threatening at any moment. As soon as you stop, pulling, the wheel just ceases. That's a whole different thing. It's continuity. That was excellent. And you're certainly ready now to go down to the tank, where we'll first start with flat water, and then we'll go on to moving water, which will be the finish. Okay, well, this is what we call the new tank, simply because the water here moves. Eventually will move, but it's not going to move right now. I think we'll do here just what we did upstairs on the bikers. I'm just going to shut up and just let you, here you have an oar, a 12-foot oar. Just go out and row a little bit and see what you think, and then after that we'll discuss what you've done. We'll take 3 or 4 more strokes. Okay, good. Let's stop for that. And basically, that's, all you're doing is extending what you learned upstairs right onto the oar, and I'm very impressed by that start. There's just no real big problems at all. Big problems would be if the mere fact that you're sitting here with an oar in your hand would mean that you go right back to square one upstairs, and every once in a while that happens, and it's really depressing to me because it means that we have to start all over again. But everything we did upstairs is fine. So we'll make one change here. And the change will simply be that as opposed to rowing in a rowboat or something like that, I have no idea whether you've ever done that or not, but in a rowboat, there's a real circular motion, kind of like an oval, because the gunnels are so high off the water. They really have to row these things. Even when you row them well, you row them with a big circular motion. That's not at all the same as rowing an 8-oak shell. You just cover the black part here, and that and only that stays covered all the way through to the end, and then you tuck it out. And I'll show you how easy that is. Just let go of the handle a second, and we'll just let the oar sit there. The guy who made these oars had it in mind that if we just left the oar alone, what I just said would happen. Notice how it's exactly right. The tip of the blade is just underwater, and that's all that's underwater. There's no water up on the shaft at all, maybe an inch of water on the shaft. So it turns out that exactly perfect rowing, which very few people do, from the catch here all the way back, and especially back at the finish here, very, very few people keep that blade really covered there. Really good blade work turns out to be not you doing something, but you just not doing something. If you could just let the oar do what it would perfectly naturally like, and look at that, you let it go there, that's the perfect elite level finish. Available to anybody who would allow this poor oar to do exactly what it wants to do. What happens is people, they've been taught what it ought to look like, and instead of taking the approach to just let it, find a way to let that happen, they start trying to manipulate the oar in some way to make it happen, and a long struggle ensues. Just the same way upstairs, you found the angles because the angles were inevitable by just relaxing and just rowing along. Same thing is true here. You can see that the proper height of that blade in the water is inevitable if you just back off and just row and let the thing happen. So let's just go along, and once again, instead of you trying to make it happen, just keep that principle in mind of sort of the image of what you want it to look like, and then just row along and look at it. I think it helps a great deal to look at it. And especially keep reminding yourself over and over again, it's not that you have to do anything about the height of the handle of the blade, it's that you have to prevent yourself from doing things, from tugging up or yanking down, all the things that you'd be wanting to do with good intentions, to put that in exactly the right place. Say to yourself, I don't want to do anything, I just want to put the oar in the water and then just stop doing anything except what I did upstairs. And you'll find the concave front of that oar just locks right into the exact proper place. As you draw towards yourself, say to yourself over and over again, I just want the oar to sit where it wants to sit, and to let it teach me inboard. If you can feel that that's where it wants to be, and it's teaching you where to put your body and your muscles, as opposed to you doing things with your body and muscles to put that oar where it ought to be, and you'll be fine. Let me say that one more time. Most people use their body, their muscles, their skeleton, everything they can find to force that blade to be someplace. I prefer to have you do the opposite. You know where the blade ought to be. You know where it would like to be. Let it teach you by being sensitive to what it wants to do out there. Let it teach you where your hands ought to be, where your shoulders ought to be, where your arms ought to be. And just listen to it over and over again. Feel it. Feel it teach you constantly. That's very, very important. Just a shallow now. Just the black part. One more stroke. And stop. Okay, fine. Now you're doing these things correctly, but sometimes it's nice after you're doing them correctly to know what it was you were doing. Just take a look at your blade. This is no feather rowing now. What you're looking for is to have the blade come back with the shaft parallel to the surface of the water. And just as you reach out the last part, just as you were, they had it drop down into the water and get covered with a tiny bit of backsplash as you were doing, and then pick up the pressure. So that it comes back like this, and as you reach out the last bit, it drops down, it meets the water, strangely enough, with the backside of the blade. The first part of the blade you touch is actually the backside, and as it touches the backside, it comes right in, and then you pick up on the front side. At the other end of the stroke, just as you were doing, all the black stays covered until you're about a couple of inches from your shirt, and just at that point there, you just tap down and out comes the blade. And the blade will have to move towards the stern of the boat a little bit as it comes out, because after all, the water's moving in a moving boat. So that you can't just suddenly back the water and shove the blade out. You get caught doing that. In all honesty, you come in, and just a little bit from you, you just let the blade drift, let the handle drift towards you just the tiniest bit as you quite quickly just tap down on the handle, and out comes the oar. Okay, so I think after that, the best thing for us to do, we'll just take a few strokes. Just getting the feel of that. That's right. Don't row hard. If the water isn't moving, the load is too heavy. There you go. Tuck it out. Meet the water with the backside. Very, very nice. Okay, let's stop there, because you've got that. And right now what we're going to do is we'll go on to the next step, which is to learn how to feather the blade, because if you don't know how to feather the blade, it's going to be extremely difficult once the water starts to move. What I'm doing now is just exactly the same exercise you did upstairs when you started on the concept 2 ergometer. First it was just the arms like this, and then after that with the arms away and the body over to your hamstrings double tight, and that would be rolling like this. And last of all, it was a little bit of track and coming down. But I'm doing one thing very different. I'm feathering the blade back flat, which we do for obvious reasons of wind resistance. And you need to know what to do in the hands when that's going on. So let's take each hand, one hand at a time. The hand that does the feathering is the hand that's out nearest the blade the most or closest towards the oarlock. And what it does is really fairly simple. It just keeps hold of the water. And I'm not going to discuss what the hand ought to be doing, because once again, that's inevitable if the blade is proper. You know that the blade has been properly balanced and everything so that it fits where it ought to be. What you're going to end up with is the top of the hand here absolutely parallel to the surface of the river, and there'll be a fairly sharp angle down in your forearm. It won't be here. If it is here, you'll be shrugging. So that's got to be down there a little bit. So all you do is draw right in here, and when you're just short of the shirt, then this wrist taps down, and as it does, it's very important that you let the thumb come off and the fingers stay right where they were. And let's take a look at where the fingers and the hand are. When the blade is square, right angles, the handle ought to be directly underneath what I call the hand, which is back of the knuckles here. There's the hand, and here are the fingers. It's like a right angle, like this. Here's the hand up here, and here are the fingers down here. When the blade is square, the handle is under the hand entirely. When the blade is flat, it should be under the fingers entirely. It rotates that amount. So in you draw with the hand on top of the handle, drop, it goes into the fingers, and as you come forward for any stroke, the handle ought to be under the fingers and the thumb off. And the reason the thumb is off, just so you'll understand that, is if the thumb stays on, your wrist gets jammed down there, and any attempt to extend your arm now is virtually impossible. It really hurts. It hurts through here, and it hurts back where you get tennis elbow. And the chance of just tightening up and tendinitis and all sorts of things, or just arms that feel like molten iron or something late in the race, it's just inevitable if that's going to happen. Or you won't feather. And many, many novice crews, towards the end of a race, are simply not feathering at all. The blade, because they're holding on with their thumb, the thumb never comes off, and because their forearm is tightening, literally the blade never gets more than 45 degrees at best, and sometimes in the sprint, they're just rowing no feather. And imagine in a howling headwind what that would do. There's just no way. Okay, so once again, you draw in, down goes the wrist, out into the fingers, thumb stays off, and you square up out here, just over the toes, not by dropping the thumb down, but just by pushing with the fingers a little bit, especially with the little finger. That is on the inside. You can grab a little bit, squeeze, oppose a little bit if you like. That little opposition between the fingertips and the knuckles there. You can hold on with that and get it started. Break the inertia that way. So just with the inside hand then, into the fingers, thumb off, just oppose, squeeze a little bit, and square the blade up. And of course the blade gets fully 90 degrees in the air and then drops in. Meanwhile, on the outside hand, what's happening? The answer is nothing. Watch. It turned out, as you've learned upstairs, and it rotates inside of it, and likewise out here, it turns inside of it again. So let's take a good careful look at that. This hand turns out, the handle rotates inside of it freely. You come forward, and as you square up again, once again, it rotates freely inside of it. It'll take about 3 strokes like that, so you can watch that now. That hand turns out, index finger up, rotate, square up. Out goes the left wrist again, or the outside wrist again. Okay, well that shows you what the hands ought to be doing, and we need to relate that now to what's going on the end of the blade. Okay, so now rolling no feather the way you were, this is what it ought to look like. Straight back, staying covered, lifting out, straight back, parallel with the surface of the river, back in, meet with the back side of the blade, a little bit of backsplash out there to catch. The first part is the back side of the blade, tucks in, and straight back. Now, we'll change this to the feather this time. In goes the blade. Now we come to the end. The blade starts out, and as it starts out, it rolls back flat. Doesn't lift out all the way and roll back flat. And it doesn't roll back this way onto the surface and then lift off. It's a compromise between the two. Draws in, and about halfway out, as you start to lift it out, it also rolls back flat. So that's the finish. Now it stays flat as you go out across your knees and out across the ankles. And right about the toes, once again with opposition in the little finger and the knuckles. You start to turn it, and hopefully, for the first 45 degrees, it'll stay up in the air, but in the second 45 degrees, it'll start down towards the water, and ideally, it'll get fully squared just in time to meet the water with the back side of the blade tucked right in. So here we go then. It starts out, rolls back flat, starts squaring, and then drops right down, tucks itself in. It'll take 3 or 4 strokes like that before you give it a try. Notice the blade is fully square before it drops in. The last thing it does is square up. But also notice that the first part of the blade touched the water, and it's so important, is the back side of the blade. And then you react to that by rolling. So let's say, in one way of putting it is that you extend the blade out into the water. You don't draw the blade into the water. You extend the blade out into the water. Another way of looking at it is the entry of the blade into the water is the last part of it sweep back away from the top, not the first part of the pull through. Let me say that one more time. That's awfully important. The entry of the blade into the water is the last part of it sweep back towards the water. The last part. You sweep it back into the water like that. You sweep it back into the water. And then you pull in reaction to the fact that it's in the water. The opposite of that, typical but faulty, is that you reach out into the air and then you pull it into the water. It's a typical and very serious fault. It's very serious and very typical. Very few crews handle that well. Most crews, I think it's safe to say the vast majority of crews, their blade enters the water as the first part of the pull through rather than the last part of the recovery. They reach out and then they pull the blade into the water in one fashion or another, rather than reaching the blade out into the water and then picking up the pressure in the first direction. So now it's time for you to try that and see if we can get that right before we start the water run. And turns out, that's it. And around we go. And all the turning going on this stuff again, down the toes. This hand's going to rotate right back to where it normally would. And goes the blade. Turn out. Hand goes down. I'd start to square up just a little bit sooner. Keep your thumbs right in behind the handle, even though they're nice and loose. Both thumbs just lightly behind the handle. That's right. Okay, blade square. That's it. Right back. Thumb stays back. That's it. There it goes. Thumb stays under. So there's a difference between the thumbs being out the side or just hanging down. Down is where they want to out towards the side, you stay down. Facing down. Exactly. Very nice. Very nice. Start squaring a little bit sooner this time and you'll really have it. Start the rotation out here. Instead of at your toes, start back to your ankle this time. You get square. Now, and you're all set. Okay, so when we start rolling the moving water here, the first thing that I want you to try to do is this backwater drill, which we talked about. Basically, all we're trying to do here is to have you learn that you're in command of this water, that the water doesn't have to sweep the blade forward if you don't want it to. And so what you're asked to do is to reach out, place the blade in the water, and instead of moving immediately with the water, actually let the water pile up on the back side of the blade, and then you just go through the motions. That's very nice, just right. Go through the motions, but never letting the water be in charge. You always backing a little bit against the water. We call this the backwater drill for that purpose, and we do an awful lot of this. The idea being that you're in charge of what's going on. You don't just touch the water and then freak out totally and let the water take command. But in fact, you put the blade in and you dictate what's going to happen. And in this case, you're dictating, I think, the hardest thing of all to happen with all this water moving with the diesel engine. You're dictating that you're going to let all the force of that water back up on the back side of the blade. So correct in this, and this is partially correct in this is to cover 1 inch of the blade, leading with the back side. So there'll be backsplash every catch to cover just 1 inch, and then by looking at your blade to keep only 1 inch covered all the way through. And with moderate success in that area. That was a good one. That was a good one. Keep just that 1 inch covered all the way through, and then just short of your shirt, lift it out. And once you've got that right, once it's not going too deep every once in a while, or too shallow once in a while, once you're able to cover 1 inch, there's another really good one. Then you know that your handle path is really flat as a starter, and you're not going to be too deep or too shallow, and that your handle path is flat because of things you're doing and not because of things being done to you. So it's not an accident. If you can do the backwater drill, then you know that the proper rowing that's going on here is no accident. But there's no way you can do this drill correctly by sheer chance. Every part of it is something that's having to be consciously done. That's very, very nice. I think based on what I see there, you're entirely ready now for us to just have you roll and take a look at what your rowing looks like. Because believe it or not, I think you're going to be able to row.